With that being said, she needs no introduction, but our next speaker, we wouldn't be here if it was not for her. Her work focuses on advancing women's financial inclusion, economic participation, ownership pathways across Africa. Let us stand, because I think she does deserve a standing ovation, because the hard work that goes behind it is often not noticed and often not thanked. It's the thankless work that the hours she spends, whether it's away from her family, inputting into the women within our country and the continent at large, the women she speaks to. So I think it's only right that we give her flowers while she's due, right? So let us give a standing ovation for the founder of our Alfie generation. Ms. Zimkhitha Gova, let's give her a round of applause.
Wow, good morning, ladies. Can you clap your hands for yourselves? Wow, thank you so much. Protocol observed. Thank you so much, Medineo. You helped me with protocol, so I'm observing that protocol. You may sit down. I am not one to speak. I don't like speaking. I love working behind the scenes. But I said, no, Sisi, you are the one who's going to set the scene. I just wanted to welcome everyone. But I'll try. If possible, I'll try also to cut it short. But before I go into it, thank you so much for coming here. Earlier on, it was mentioned that there are ladies from Ugi. Ugi is my hometown people. But I want to mention that it is through partnerships with the Graça Machel Trust that we are able to bring them in rooms like this. There's work that we are doing. Last year, we visited about 4 provinces. And Eastern Cape, we chose Eastern Cape, Northwest, Free State, and Gauteng. And we're very deliberate that we are going to visit rural areas as well. And when it came to Eastern Cape, when you talk Eastern Cape, people usually assume Port Elizabeth, East London, That is not Eastern Cape, people. Eastern Cape is Ugi, and I'm sure some of you don't even know where that is. Eastern Cape is Maclear, Mount Fletcher, the places that are never mentioned. But there are women there doing wonderful things. So when we were working with them and we told them, guys, we've got a conference, they said, Sisi, we are coming. They arrived this morning with a taxi, and they're leaving tomorrow night. When we finish, they're leaving. So thank you guys for making it. And why are we here? I mentioned that we're doing some work, partnership with the Graça Machel Trust. We run one of their flagship programs called New Faces, New Voices South Africa. So there's an unpublished study by the trust that was done last year on the status of women's financial inclusion in South Africa, which I'm going to be talking about it a bit later. That study, we used it as our engagement as we were going to these provinces. This year we're going to KZN. And if you are working for a financial institution that has funds, that wants to partner with us. There's still more provinces that we want to touch that we have not done. So, welcome to Hair Economy 2026. You are here to work. Yes, you look glamorous. And yes, please make sure, I was telling the ladies when we were driving here this morning, when you attend an event, you are there to work. Yes, you have taken time out of the business, but you are working. You are here to network. And you are here to open your ears and wait for that light bulb moment where you can hear something and you go back and implement it in your own business. So today we are gathered here, and it is a critical moment, not only for women and not only for South Africa, but for the future architecture of our economies. Because the question before us is no longer whether women should be included in the economy. Women are already in the economy. We are the economy. In fact, we are the hidden gem of economies. So it is no longer a question of whether we should be included or not. We are already in the economy. Women are entrepreneurs, women are workers, we are consumers, we are caregivers, we are informal financiers. Earlier on, Uthelma was talking about stockfields. We know most those stockfields, they give out loans. So that is informal financiers. So we are the systems. We are market makers, and we are the market movers and shakers. So the real question now is no longer who owns the system. The real question now is who owns the system, as the speakers mentioned before. Who designs it? Who controls capital flows? Who is there in the room deciding who has to be funded? Who benefits from wealth creation? This is very close to my heart. I want women to create wealth,
Great.
And why, despite decades of financial inclusion efforts, are women still structurally excluded from ownership? That is the systems question Hey Economy 2026 has been designed to confront. This summit is intentionally moving from conversation, it's moving the conversation from access to ownership, from participation to power, from inclusion to capital control, and perhaps most importantly, moving from dialogue to commitments. This is very important. We've been talking, we've been in rooms talking, and ladies, aren't we tired of talking? We are tired. We're moving from dialogue to commitments. We want commitments. And as AUFI, we are here to make sure that those commitments are made, and also we are going to follow up on them. Hence, we invited policymakers and financial institutions to be in the room. For more than a decade, financial inclusion strategies across Africa have focused primarily on expanding access. We know opening bank accounts, providing microcredit, increasing financial literacy, supporting entrepreneurship. Yes, these efforts mattered, but access alone has not fundamentally shifted ownership patterns. The evidence is becoming impossible to ignore. As I mentioned, the study by the Gracia Machel Trust, it makes this painfully clear. The study argues that South Africa has largely achieved what it calls financial inclusion 1.0. Access to financial services, but has not achieved financial inclusion 2.0, which is meaningful usage, empowerment, measurable economic impact for women. And this distinction matters enormously because a woman can have a bank account and still have no assets. She can have access to credit and still remain trapped in debt. She can participate in markets and still never accumulate wealth. She can run a business and still never own scalable capital. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is not empowerment. It is managed participation. The study shows that approximately 82% of South African adults have a bank account. And women actually have slightly higher account ownership than men. sitting at 87% compared to 80%. When we mentioned this at our dialogue in the Eastern Cape, somebody said, you know what, maybe it's because women have SASSA accounts. You know, maybe it's because of SASSA that we have so many bank accounts than men. We can think that's progress, that women have more bank accounts than men. At face value, yes, it sounds like it's progress, but when you look deeper, a very different story emerges. Women continue to have lower access to productive credit, home loans, investment products, and business financing. Women are more likely to use financial services for survival and household management than for wealth accumulation. Does that ring true? Yeah. Women are more likely to borrow for immediate household needs, while men borrow for assets and business growth. And women-owned businesses remain dramatically undercapitalized. The study found that 45% of women entrepreneurs rely primarily on personal savings to fund their businesses, while only 4% access personal loans for business growth. Okay. Think about what that means. It means that we are asking women to build scalable enterprises using household survival capital. And then we wonder why ownership stalls. And we know the problem is not women's ambition. Aren't we ambitious, ladies? Absolutely. We're very ambitious. The problem is architecture. Our financial systems were not designed around the realities of women's economic lives. Most financial products still assume continuous formal employment, predictable income streams, traditional collateral, formal business records, and uninterrupted career trajectories. But many African women operate within different economic realities. We operate within irregular income, caregiving interruptions, informal enterprise structures, collective financial models, community-based saving systems, and multi-burden households. Yet the system continues to evaluate women against norms built around male economic patterns. And so women remain over-included in consumption finance, but under-included in ownership finance. The study highlights another critical reality. Women's financial exclusion cannot be separated from broader structural inequality. Women in South Africa continue to face higher unemployment, lower digital access, greater unpaid care burdens, and persistent gender-based violence. The report reminds that financial inclusion is deeply connected to safety, agency, and dignity. A woman who lacks economic power often lacks the ability to live unsafe environments. A woman without assets often lacks bargaining power, feels voiceless. A woman excluded from ownership remains vulnerable regardless of how financially included she appears on paper. And that is why Hey Economy 2026 is not merely a finance conference. It is a systems intervention, because ownership changes everything. Ownership changes intergenerational wealth. It changes bargaining power. It changes political influence. It changes who gets heard in boardrooms. It changes whose interests shape markets. And yet globally and across Africa, ownership remains deeply unequal. The research referenced in our summit engagement shows 1 in 4 African entrepreneurs is a woman, one of the highest rates globally. Women generate roughly 33% of Africa's GDP. Yet, Women-owned firms capture less than 1% of corporate procurement opportunities. And the global financing gap for women-owned SMMEs stands at approximately $1.9 trillion US. So the issue is clearly not participation. Women are already economically active. The issue is who captures value, who accumulates assets, and who controls capital. This summit therefore asks difficult but necessary questions. How do we redesign capital allocation frameworks to produce ownership outcomes for women? How do we shift women from thin margin sectors into high growth industries? How do we redesign financial products around women's realities instead of expecting women to adapt to systems never built for them? How do we ensure gender-smart regulation rather than supposedly gender-neutral systems that default to male norms? How do we move from measuring account ownership to measuring wealth accumulation? And perhaps most importantly, how do we make the ownership gap measurable, undeniable, and impossible to ignore? Because what gets measured gets funded. What gets funded gets scaled, and what gets scaled shape economies. The unpublished Gresham-Marshall Trust study also makes an important recommendation. We must move beyond simply counting banking accounts and begin measuring outcomes. Not how many women opened bank accounts, but how many women accumulated productive assets. Not how many women accessed credit, but how many built wealth. Not how many women participated, but how many women own. That is the shift Hey Economy 2026 is demanding. And this work cannot be carried by women alone. It requires regulators, institutional investors, it requires banks, it requires development finance institutions, it requires pension funds, policymakers, market infrastructure actors, because ownership is not only a gender issue, it is an economic growth issue. The study cites the IMF research showing that reducing gender disparities in financial access could increase economic output in sub-Saharan Africa by up to 6%. And this is economic strategy. And it is why we are here. So ladies and gentlemen, roll up your sleeves. We are here to work. The sessions that are going to happen after this, it is work. Let us redesign together.
Thank you.